welcome to Life Bridge. My name's Grant, if we haven't met yet. Today we are wrapping up a 3-week series on pride. And I want to make an appeal. Before we wrap this up, just one last appeal. If you've been following along online, or you've been here for the whole week, a whole series, or maybe you just, this is your first day, this is a big opportunity. Because this is the last opportunity that at least we're going to provide, or anybody's probably going to provide for you, to really look at your pride just full on and address this imposter in every one of our lives that is killing us. And again, I want to make the appeal. We've done this all 3 weeks. If you haven't been here, we've made the appeal, kill it before it kills you. It's destroying each and every one of us, and we have got to take a look at it and fix what's going on in our life. Now, to do that, I really weighed this heavily. I was like, so what are we going to talk about the last week? I got one more shot at this. And I love what G.K. Chesterton said. You may not know him, but he's a famous theologian that wore a cool sombrero. He said this. He said, if I had one sermon to preach, it would be on pride. And I heard that this week, and I went, wow, that's a heavy moment. I want to take this moment and really think about what we're going to talk about, what we're going to say. One last opportunity to kill pride. And so I just come down to this. I thought, you know what? Pride is most evident. Pride is most evident when our weaknesses are exposed. Isn't that true? And to put that another way, when you get insulted, that's when your pride shows up. When you get criticized, when somebody dances dangerously close to an insecurity that you have, that's when pride roars its ugly head. And during this series, you might have been coming thinking, yeah, this is really good. I've got some pride issues I guess I need to work on. But for the most part, I'm pretty humble. I'm a pretty humble guy or gal or whatever. Until somebody exposes one of your weaknesses, and then all of a sudden, out of nowhere, you're like, ah! Right? It just comes out of nowhere. Pride is most evident when our weaknesses are exposed, because this is how we treat our lives. It's kind of like you're selling a house for sale by owner. Anybody ever sell their house for sale by owner? Go ahead and raise your hand if you were crazy enough to do this, right? My wife and I did this one time because I just couldn't pay a realtor, right? So we were doing the house for sale by owner. It's tough. Because number one, you got to keep your house clean all the time. People will just show up and knock on the door and be like, can we look at your house? And be like, yeah, just give us a second. Kids, you're all sloppy and messy and fix it. Open the door. Yeah, come on in, right? Keep the house all clean. Then you show people around. And what you're constantly doing is you're constantly walking behind them, just waiting for them to turn their attention towards something that you know is a weakness. That crack in the sheetrock that you mudded over and painted over, or maybe whatever it is. One lady came in, she looked, and we had kind of high ceilings. And she looked, and she was like, oh, these are great high ceilings. And I'm like, oh, yeah, it's just great to have high ceilings. And she was like, what's your heat and air bill like? And I was like, I don't know, it's not bad. Have you seen the yard? Right? Constantly moving people away from the weaknesses and constantly focusing on our strengths. And that's what we do in our life. We spend a whole life doing that exact thing, and it's kind of exhausting. We spend our whole life, in fact, I would say the majority of our time is invested in making sure that our weaknesses are hidden and our strengths are accentuated. And when somebody exposes a weakness that we have, we see our pride in a whole new way. So today we're going to look at how do we manage these weaknesses. And we're going to do it from the viewpoint of the Apostle Paul. Because he's going to give us this perspective that nobody else, I can promise you this, nobody else in the world is going to teach you this. This is only something you're going to get from the Bible, and specifically, it's only something you're going to get from the Apostle Paul. There was a time for the Apostle Paul that he was actually, his weaknesses were being exposed. He would go around early, and he would plant churches. And he planted churches in Galatia, and he planted churches in Ephesus, and he planted a church in Corinth. And then he would send people back, and he would say, okay, guys, go back and kind of evaluate how things are going, get a vibe, and come back to me and tell me how things are going, and maybe I'll write a letter to them. And that's where we get the New Testament. These are the letters that he wrote back to these churches that he had already started, all of Paul's writings. So there's this one church in Corinth that he had started, which ended up kind of being a mess for a bunch of different reasons. But he sent some people back, and he's like, hey, go see how things are going. So they go back, and they evaluate it. And things are kind of mess, and they're kind of ugly, and they evaluate the church. And then they come back to Paul, and they say, Paul, people in Corinth are not saying good things about you. And he's like, no, not me. I'm Paul, right? They wouldn't know Jesus if it weren't for... I started that... They can't be saying bad things, but yeah, actually they're criticizing you pretty heavily. And here are the three things that we get from the book of 2 Corinthians that they were criticizing Paul for. It looks like this. The first thing was that he was not a trained speaker. Now, that doesn't mean that Paul was boring. It might have been that. It might have been like that, maybe that professor you had or that high school teacher, where they were like, you knew their IQ was like incredible. But when they got up to speak, you were just like, oh my goodness, shut up, right? Really, and Paul might have been one of those guys, but I have a feeling it's more along the lines of he was not a trained orator, which probably meant that he did not enunciate his words correctly. That's the kind of thing they're pointing out. And so what was happening is these super apostles had come into Corinth. After Paul had left, these guys that had come in kind of masquerading as apostles, and this was kind of the title that was given to them. They were apostles, kind of, except they were super, right? So they came in and they were super apostles, and when they came into town, they talked correctly. They were trained orators, and everybody in Corinth was like, man, they talk fancy. They must be right. They must be smart, right? So that was one of the things. They were like, yeah, Paul's good and everything, but he's not a trained orator. Second thing, it says that they criticized him because he was timid. Now, if you've read much of the New Testament, that's pretty crazy that Paul would be criticized for being timid, because Paul would walk into synagogues and tell people that didn't believe in Jesus about Jesus that he had never met. It tells us that Peter was in the wrong one time, and Paul walked right up to him and opposed him to his face. Paul was anything but timid. And yet what they complained about was, yeah, he's bold in his letters and stuff, but when he gets here and he's in person, he's not what we're looking for. And I think what that comes down to is they are mistaking his humility for timidity. They're mistaking what is actually a very humble person for being timid. So they're kind of wanting that general, right? Some of us kind of crave a Napoleon-type leader until we get one. But anyway, they're wanting this kind of general to come into town and be like, okay, this is what God wants, this is where we're going, this is what we're doing, and you're going to do that. And if you're not on board, you're just worthless to me, and just get out of my way. And I think they're wanting this strong, driven leader. And Paul comes into town, and he's talking about loving people, and he's humble, and he's not puffing himself up at all. And people are like, yeah, when Paul shows up, he's timid. But these super apostles, man, they're the kind of leaders we need. And then one more, he was free of charge. That was the complaint. He was free. To me, this is kind of like, and I think you and I have experienced this. On Halloween, my kids bring home free candy, and they give me Baby Ruths, right? And I got to tell you, on the face of the earth, there's like nothing better than a Baby Ruth, right? It's chocolate and nuts and stuff like that. And so I enjoy it. I enjoy Baby Ruth. But then here's what we do as people. We're just weird. We go to these places like Rocky Mountain Chocolate Factory. And we go in, and they've got these big old things that are actually kind of hard to eat because they're chewy and they're big. But they've got chocolate that's like flown in from, Paraguay or something. I don't know. And they got nuts, and it's essentially a really schmancy Baby Ruth, right? And everybody likes it better because why? Because it's $9. And we're like, man, that's really good stuff right there at $9, right? So we get convinced that it's better. But guys, there is nothing better than a free Baby Ruth. Enjoy it. Maybe that's the downriver coming out in me, but that's just what I like. So got some people excited about Baby Ruth. So Paul was coming in free of charge, and they were like, no, these other guys, these super apostles, they have a booking fee, and they're really on top of that. So Paul is receiving this criticism. Some of it's kind of true, right? No, he wasn't a trained orator, right? No, he isn't a general, right? Some of it's kind of true. Some of it's a genuine weakness of his. And so it's being criticized. And Paul's response is everything. His response is so masterful and so perfect. He doesn't just ignore them. He knows that he needs them to listen to him, to respect him, and to hear the words that he's going to say. So he responds back with this humility. And we can learn how to manage our weaknesses, to humbly respond to critics from these words that Paul says. Here's what he says. He's in the middle of a discourse, kind of defending himself. 2 Corinthians 11, verse 16, he says, I repeat, let no one take me for a fool. Right? Now, you guys have chalked me up to just this idiot that doesn't talk very well and is a fool. But if you do, then tolerate me just as you would a fool, so that I might do a little boasting. And he's going to draw attention to the fact that boasting is foolish. In this self-confident boasting, I am not talking as the Lord would, but as a fool. Keep that in mind. Every time you boast self-confidently or you give people your credentials, you're not really doing what God would do. You're doing what you would do. And some of us are quick to do that, right? Some of us are pretty quick to give people our credentials, to defend ourselves. And Paul's saying, okay, you guys have put me in a position where I am forced. I wouldn't do this, but I am forced to give you my credentials. Since many are boasting in the way the world does, I too will boast. You gladly put up with fools since you are so wise. So he's saying, hey, you guys, since you're so smart, you're paying attention to these fools, these super apostles. You're listening to them. And so you've kind of put me in a situation where now I have to brag and I have to boast. To me, it's kind of like the way I used to fill out a resume. It's kind of weird. When I was a young preacher, I would apply. I know that may sound kind of weird, but when you go to a different ministry, you actually send a resume, and people kind of look at it sometimes, and I would never get any callbacks. And finally, one of my friends looked at my resume, and he's like, dude, you can't be humble in a resume. So I would just tell people where I worked, and God did some great things, and I hope you'll consider me. And he's like, that's not going to work. That's just going to go in the trash all the time. He's like, you got to brag when you fill out a resume, or you might as well not even fill one out. Okay. So the next time I applied somewhere, I filled out this resume, and I'm like, I did this, and the church grew by this much, and this is how many people came to Jesus, and it was like this big, and I had this big, long resume, and I got a lot of callbacks. Never got hired at any of those places, because then they interviewed me, and that's kind of where it all fell apart. But anyway, that's what Paul's kind of doing. He's at a place where I don't want to do this. This isn't what I think is smart, but I need you to listen to me. I need you to hear me. And so I'm going to give you some foolish boasting. Verse 20. He says, in fact, and this might be a little bit of a dig, in fact, you even put up with anyone who enslaves you or exploits you or overtakes you or takes advantage of you or puts on airs or slaps you in the face. To my shame, I admit that we were too weak for that. He's just saying, listen, you're going to listen to these hoity-toity people and their defense. I want to let you know, no, I never did that. But let me give you a reason to believe. Here's my credentials. Whatever anyone else dares to boast about, I am speaking as a fool. Just a reminder, this is not smart to talk this way. I also dare to boast about. Are they Hebrews? So am I. Are they Israelites? So am I. Are they Abraham's descendants? So am I. He's just saying, listen, I'm legit, right? I'm really an Israelite. I'm really Abraham's descendant. I'm the real deal. He says, are they servants of Christ? One more reminder, I am out of my mind to talk like this. This is not my more normal mode. I wouldn't normally say this, but let me just say this to you. I am more. I am more. I want you to understand that. It's really important you hear. And then he explains why he is more. And it's not because he's a trained orator, and it's not because he led an army. It's because of this. I have worked much harder, been in prison more frequently, been flogged more severely, and been exposed to death again and again. Listen to this. Catch this. 5 times I received from the Jews the 40 lashes minus one. The scourging that almost killed Jesus, Paul received 5 different times. 3 times I was beaten with rods. Once I was pelted with stones. 3 times I was shipwrecked. I spent a night and the day in the open sea. I have been constantly on the move. I have been in danger from rivers, in danger from bandits, in danger from my fellow Jews, in danger from Gentiles, in danger in the city, in danger in the country, and in danger at sea, and in danger from false believers. I have labored and toiled and have often gone without sleep, and I have known hunger and thirst and have often gone without food. I have been cold and naked. And I think they're catching the shift in the tone. Doesn't have anything to do with whether he has a PhD or where he's from or whether he's a trained orator. The tone is, people are hearing that and they're going, oh, that's right. We're talking about Paul. Paul's been beaten half to death for the sake of the gospel. He is the shell of the man he used to be. He's completely devoted himself to humbly going throughout the world and telling people about the name of Jesus. And then he kind of goes a little bit deeper. He says, verse 28, besides everything else, I face daily the pressure of my concern for all the churches. He's like, don't you understand, guys? I'm burdened for you. I'm burdened that you're being swept away by these super apostles. I'm burdened for the church in Ephesus. I'm burdened for the church in Colossus. I'm just burdened all the time, and that's all I think about. And I've got this heavy weight on my heart for all of these churches. And then this is his response to people that are criticizing the fact that he is weak and timid and untrained. This is his response. He says, who is weak, and I do not feel weak? And then just one step farther on top of all this, he says, who is led into sin, and I do not inwardly burn? On top of everything else that is going on in my life, I'm struggling. We don't know what the struggle was, but he's struggling with the same temptations that all of us face. I'm struggling with lust. I'm struggling with pride. I'm struggling with the desire to come and just thump you guys on the head. He's struggling with his sin. And then he goes to explain. He says this line that should completely change our view of everything. He says, if I must boast, I will boast of all the things that show my weaknesses. If I must boast, I will boast of all the things that show my weaknesses. And then, as if to take kind of that deep statement and expound on it, he says this, the God and Father of the Lord Jesus Christ, who is to be praised forever, knows that I am not lying. In Damascus, the governor under King Aretas had the city of the Damascus guarded in order to arrest me, but I was lowered in a basket from a window in the wall and slipped through his hands. As kind of an illustration of his ultimate life, he was like, guys, when I go into a town, I don't know what's going to happen. And people come after me. And there was even this one time where I didn't know what was going to happen. I thought maybe this was the end for me. I thought they had me pinned down. I thought they were going to throw me in jail for the rest of my life. I thought they were going to cut off my head. I thought this was the end for me. And then somebody came up with an idea to lower me in a basket so that I could escape. Do you know how humiliating that is? Do you know how humbling it is to have a bunch of your followers cuddle you in a basket and lower you in a wall? And he's saying, listen, I don't always know what's going to happen. I just know that through my weaknesses, the glory of God is revealed. I had this big oak dining room table. It was really nice, and the reason I had it is because somebody gave it to me. Had this really nice oak table that had been handed down, and we really liked it. Well, about 3 months after we did it, we got it. It had these big oak pillars on it. One of them broke, just split. Might have had something to do with my 200-pound son sitting on the table, but anyway, broke it. Flipped it over. One of these pillars in the middle of it had been split in like 4 or 5 different places. We were getting ready to throw it away, and I was like, well, you know what? Why don't we try some wood glue? I was like, so I just slathered wood glue all over this thing and stuck it, clamped it, but put it there for a while, and then we set it back up. Do you know that thing continued on for like 3 more years? I was amazed at that glue. Now, here's the thing. During that 3-year period of time, I never invited people over to my house and drew attention to my broken table, right? I never said, hey, welcome to my house. I want you to see what's wrong with my table. I never did that. Why did I never do that? Because I don't want people to know that I've got this broken down, hand-me-down table that's busted underneath everything. I didn't do that with anybody. In fact, I got to thinking about it. There's only one reason why I would ever invite people to do that, to come look at my broken table. And that's if I were a glue salesman. Right? Think about it. Like if I were a traveling glue salesman, which I'm sure there are none of those anymore, but if I was a glue salesman, my whole life and my whole foundation of my life was built on the fact that this glue works. When people came over to my house, I would welcome them in the house, and I would say, oh, yeah, here's the living room, and here's never mind. Hey, come here, look at this table, okay? Let's flip the table. Help me with you. Flip this table over. You see this? This is busted in like 5 different spots, but I put this glue on there, and now everything is fixed. This glue. It's incredible. Paul was a Jesus salesman. He didn't care about anything in his life. The only thing he wanted people to know is that Jesus is real. And so he would go around and he wouldn't point out his strengths. He would go around and point out his weaknesses. And he would say, look, I'm broken and I'm weak and I don't always know what's going to happen and I don't know what the future holds. And no, I'm not a trained orator or speaker, but Jesus is holding me together. And so he comes and he says, when I'm weak, that's the things I'm going to boast about. Chapter 12 says this, therefore, I will boast all the more gladly about my weaknesses, so that Christ's power may rest on me. That is why, for Christ's sake, I delight in weaknesses, in insults, in hardships, in persecutions, in difficulties, and here's the punchline. For when I am weak, then I am strong. For when I am weak, then I am strong. Your weaknesses are not something you should be running and hiding. Your weaknesses are something you should be bragging about. So let me ask you that question today. When it comes to your weaknesses, are you hiding them or are you bragging about them? You spend, and again, let me say, it's exhausting to spend all this time covering up our weaknesses. Are you hiding them or are you bragging about them? One time when I was in Oklahoma, the first church I was at full time, we had this couple that had this amazing experience with Christ. God had completely changed their life because they had started being faithful to Him. And so one day they made a decision to get baptized, and I was like, hey, this is great. Before you get baptized, you know what would be really cool if you guys just stood up and you told everybody your story. So they were like, yeah, we'll do that. And they were like, but we really want to do a run-through first. And I was like, that's cool. So we went there the night before church, and we did a run-through, and they got up and they began to tell their story. And this is how they did it. They had it all written down. They were both nervous, and they were up there, and they were young, and they were like, so we made some bad decisions and did some stupid things. And then we found Jesus. And then they began to talk about their relationship with Christ. And I was like, whoa. Nobody cares, right? Don't go there yet, because nobody cares. Here's what you need to do. You need to tell them of all the places and all the ways that you were broken before you found Christ. So the next day they did exactly that. They got up and they were like, hey, we were 18 and we got pregnant. Not on purpose, but we decided to go ahead and get married. And then we got married, and our relationship was toxic. It was an abusive relationship. He would be verbally abusive to her, and she would be physically abusive to him. And after they told that, I know it's not funny, but I know after they told that, I thought that was funny because their first day at church, I later found out he had a kind of a bruise on his forehead. That was just from her. I know that's not funny, but that's the relationship. It was toxic. It was back and forth. Her verbally, she was abusive physically to him. Their relationship. They had filed for divorce the week before they started going to church. And they begin to lay out this incredible story, and they say, in day one, we decided to put our faith in Christ, and it wasn't perfect at first, but they began to pray together. They began to read the Bible together. They began to attend and get involved in church together, and Christ had completely transformed their relationship. You know what they do now? Right now in Oklahoma, they have a cafe that is basically their home, and they invite people of low income and people that can't afford to have a good meal every week. They invite people to their house, and they have a large amount of people that come over to their house every day, and they serve food to them. Here's the thing. Nobody cares about your strength. What we want to hear is people that are broken and weak. That's where we find Jesus. Now, I was thinking about this. This occurred to me yesterday. I was going to end it there, and I thought, wait a minute. I can't get up and tell you to boast about your weaknesses unless I boast about my weaknesses. So I was thinking, I was like, well, I don't know if I can get up here and tell you every detail about my weaknesses, but I can tell you probably the majority of them. Some of you may already know this, but it bears repeating every once in a while. I flunked out of high school. I didn't drop out of high school and go get my GED because I was just ready for college. I flunked out of high school because I had been cheating for so long that even if I would have tried, I probably couldn't have passed high school if I wanted to. So in the 10th grade, I dropped out of high school and got a GED, and somehow by the grace of God, ended up getting a bachelor's degree in college. I don't even know how that happened. And what's so funny is I can't even help my kids with their homework now. Got like a 4th grader. And all of a sudden they'll come to me and there's like letters with the numbers and the math, and I'm like, I don't know. I'm out. I don't know. My son at this point, he's in 10th grade. He's already completed more high school than I did. I got weaknesses. I wake up every day with an incredible hankering for chewing tobacco, right? And I'll go to the gas station. Every time I go to the gas station, there is this incredible urge, right, to buy a can. And about 95% of the time, I don't process that. Anyway, I'm weak. I'm a procrastinator. 4 years ago, we moved into the house that we're in right now, and we saw all these people with recycling bins. And we were like, oh, that's new for us, because in Missouri, we don't care about the environment. So, we were like, oh, okay, everybody, does this, so we'll do it too. And we're like, man, we got to get out there and we got to do that. And so last week, we did. Finally, who knows how cold the winter would have been, though, if we hadn't recycled. Anyway, we got weaknesses in my life. I don't know. You probably couldn't tell this by looking at me, but I'm a stress eater. I know. It's a shock. About once a week, I have to apologize to one of my kids because I was too hard on them. I don't mean I called them a name or I beat them or anything. I just pushed them too hard. I'm weak. And none of that is an excuse to drop out of high school or start chewing tobacco or procrastinate. I'm weak, and the only thing that holds me together is Jesus Christ. Let me pray for you.